Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to Heart of the Matter, a broadcast series where survivors share their story, inspiring us about overcoming health challenges. I want to remind everyone today that heart disease is the #1 killer of women, taking the lives of 1 in 4. There are 48 million women in the United States that are affected by heart disease. My guest today, I'm so honored to have my guest, is a heart survivor. BJ Babcock lives in Ridgefield, Washington, and it's just north of Vancouver. She lives with her husband, John, on 9 acres with 2 puppies and 2 parakeets. She has grown children and a 10-year-old granddaughter. She loves to read and loves to walk and sew and swim. She runs a support group for Women Heart and has done so since 2009. Can I tell them you're a massage therapist too?
Oh yeah,
She
I'm
owns,
practicing with COVID, but yes,
she owns her own business and has for years, where she's a massage therapist. And
23 years.
oh my goodness. So it's my pleasure to welcome BJ Babcock, and I'm so honored to have you here to tell your story. So when we start off, I'm going to ask you some questions after a while, but I want to hear your heart story. It's fascinating. Thank you.
Okay, should we begin?
Thank you.
So I was diagnosed at age 2 with aortic stenosis. It is called moderate aortic stenosis. In other words, you could hear it. And in fact, I can remember my pediatric cardiologist used to have interns come in, and he'd say, okay, I want you to diagnose this person. So apparently I had just that perfect sound of aortic stenosis where they could figure it out by listening. Although I was diagnosed at age 2, I can remember my first memory is using this big, I'm not sure what it's called. It's a big machine. And I can remember I didn't have a top on, but the fluoroscope machine. And they have these big goggles in orange and yellow and looking at me through the fluoroscope machine. So that goes way back. And my first memory, or maybe my parents told me so often that I didn't, I thought I heard it, but maybe I didn't. Maybe they just told me. At age 5, my parents asked the cardiologist, can she go ahead and have surgery at this point? And they said, no, it's not a good idea because she would only have a 50-50 chance in survival. They said the longer we wait, more things are going to change in the world of cardiology. And that was indeed the case. I had a relatively normal childhood. I had to nap a lot. I climbed up on the sofa all the time and napped when I needed to. It was just kind of how it was. I'd play with the kids outside and maybe get tired and come back in and lay down. So obviously I have this great relationship with the sofa. So if I want to lay down anywhere other than bed, the sofa is the place to do it. That's my place anyway. I was followed by a pediatric cardiologist until I turned 18, and then, you know how we do silly things sometimes at 18. We got married and went to live in Europe for a while. And at that time, pediatric cardiologists were not seeing people who were over the age of 18. You went to a regular cardiologist. But I kind of felt good. You know, I was leading a normal life. I didn't have any issues at that time. This is common, very common for people with congenital heart disease. You fall through the cracks. You're not really into with a pediatric cardiologist any longer, and you end up, and you're not really quite plugged into an adult cardiologist yet. And it doesn't, until you have an issue, you don't usually plug into one. In fact, I do know of 3 or 4 people who still see a pediatric cardiologist. And that just makes sense because they're the ones who deal with our plumbing issues a lot more than a conventional cardiologist, and how we respond and how we react to certain things. It makes sense that possibly we continue to see one. I know my co-coordinator, Kari, she does see a pediatric cardiologist to this day, and she said, you go in there and you're sitting in these little chairs and you're grown up. Anyway, so I didn't plug back in until I had some skin cancer, and I went to see the oncologist, and she asked me, she said, how long has it been since you've seen your cardiologist? And I said, maybe 6 or 7 years. She said, just wait here a minute. Just wait, I'll be right back. So unbeknownst to me, her husband was running the cardiology program over at Oregon Health Sciences. She comes back in the room and she says, well, I think you're fine. I don't think we have to do any further cancer treatment. But she said, you have this appointment over at Oregon Health Sciences. And so I was plugged in over there and followed until I was ready to have my surgery, which was about age 45 is when they diagnosed me. They kept saying, we're getting close, but let's hold out just a little while longer. And at the time, it's not that I didn't believe the cardiologist, but it was kind of like, that's a big surgery. I think I'm going to just have a second opinion. And so that's what I did. And actually had a third opinion. And they all said the same thing, that it was time to do the surgery. But I waited until I graduated from massage school because I was working full time and going to massage school full time. And so I had my surgery the following March. And at the time I was 46, and they said, the likelihood is that you're going to be living with this valve for a long time, and you have a choice between a mechanical valve and a tissue valve, but we would recommend a mechanical valve. And I've agreed with them because I didn't want to do it again. It was like, I did my open heart surgery. I'm done. I don't want, unless it's drastic and it's just sudden. That was where I was at with it. And they agreed with me. They felt that made the most sense. And at the time, I have a St. Jude's valve, aortic valve, and I'm on warfarin, which means I'll be on warfarin unless they come up with another type of prescription. But it's cheap. Warfarin is not expensive, and it's very effective.
Right.
And so I don't think that they will do any other type of medication anytime in the near future. So, I went with not knowing what to expect. And throughout my entire life, I never had another person to talk to. It's so different today. Now we have all kinds of great websites. There was no such thing. I was scared to death, and I didn't have anybody to talk to or anyone to ask what to expect.
Right.
But I did have complications. The linings of my lungs filled with fluid. And so I did come home after 8 days, and we just came home, and I couldn't lay down. I couldn't actually walk very far either. So I couldn't walk out to the mailbox. I couldn't do that. I really could just barely walk around the house and do what I needed to. This tells you how tired and how difficult it was for me. I would take a shower, and then I would have to come out just wrapped in my towel and sit down. I didn't have enough energy to get dressed or anything. Same thing with food. I wasn't hungry, but John would make me something, and he'd put it on the countertop, and I'd take a bite, and then I'd have to lay down on the countertop and rest for a few minutes.
And this was after your new valve.
Yeah.
You've got a new part in you. So the assumption would be you're fixed, let's go. And
well, that's it. I think a lot of surgeons say that you're fixed. No big deal. It's no big deal. We are fixed, but we're not cured. And I think that's the thing. It's like everybody reacts differently to surgery. Everybody has a different outcome. Some people breeze right through it without any issue at all. And there are those of us who sleep in a chair for 5 months. I had to sleep in a recliner because I couldn't lay down. Because when I laid down, I couldn't breathe. And so that was my life, was the sofa and the recliner.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. So this all started from congenital heart disease, something you had all your life. At birth, you were born with it.
Yes, I was born with it.
Right.
I also, at the time of surgery, they didn't know at the time, but I had a bicuspid valve instead of a tricuspid valve. So the aortic valve opening usually has 3 leaflets, and mine only had 2. And another thing that's very common with somebody who has a bicuspid valve is that I had an aneurysm. I have an aneurysm. They didn't repair the aneurysm at the time. I'm being followed. And so every year I either have an MRI or I have a CT scan.
Right.
I prefer the CT scan actually because it's fast. You're out of there. But you don't get too exposed to the radiation. So I am being followed by a cardiologist to this day. I've been real stable. My aneurysm has been relatively stable. I think at the time of surgery, it was like 4.2. It's now 4.7. And until it gets to be like here's my philosophy for me anyway, personally, is that I would prefer not to have the surgery if I don't have to. And so I talked to my cardiologist about it. She said, because you're so stable, because it's been stable for 10 years, she said, the likelihood is that even if it was over 5, because usually they do surgery to repair that aneurysm at 5.0, she said, I wouldn't do it right then. She goes, I'd wait until you either had more symptoms or be like more like 5.3, 5.5, and then do the surgery. But that's my choice. Some people kind of freak out about having an aneurysm, but a lot of those people aren't people who've lived with heart surgery with heart disease their entire lives.
And I think that shows the importance of having a good relationship with your doctor and totally understanding everything about your particular issue. And I'm proud of you for doing that. So I want to ask you a couple more questions.
Sure.
I'm curious, what did you learn about yourself during this journey? I mean, a lot of people I talk to, it's been a short time since their diagnosis, and you've had years. So what have you learned? What have you learned about yourself?
I was thinking about that, and I think that the one thing that a lot of us who are congenital people is we're stubborn. And my surgeon said that. He said, you have to be. You've lived with us your entire life. You have to be. You've had to be strong, and in order to get through it, you've had to be stubborn and you've had to be feisty. And so oftentimes I speak my mind when I go to the doctor. But one of the things about Women Heart that has taught me is that learning to advocate for myself. And that's one of the things I stressed oftentimes with other women in our group, is the fact that make the most of that 15, 20 minutes, go prepared, take your paper. I've got one for myself, my questions. I've got one for my cardiologist. We share, we compare, just so you can go and you can be succinct in what you want to ask. Sometimes other things will come up in the course of that conversation. But yes, so I think it's something you grew up with. It was very vague. Your symptoms are vague. If it hadn't been for, I noticed that when I was walking up hills and things like that, I had to stop and had difficulty breathing, but I just assumed I was out of shape. I just assumed that was just normal and it wasn't any big deal, but come to find out, yes, it was a big deal. And that is one of the symptoms that oftentimes people have when it's time to have the surgery, is that you start to shortness of breath, other symptoms. But because it happens over such a long period of time that and it's subtle. The changes are subtle. And because you've had it all your life, it's hard to know exactly where you're at.
Right. And I think we women are really good at having an excuse for everything that goes on with us. It's something that's going to go away and it's caused by something else. But
we're busy. We're raising our family. We're taking care of our parents.
We're very busy.
Things that all people do.
I know. So my last question to you today is, what is your advice to women about heart disease? What's one thing that you really want to share to women about heart disease?
I think education is really important. I think that to choose good sites, whether it's the Mayo site or whether it is the Texas Heart Institute or whether it's the Cleveland Clinic, if you're going to look up things, WebMD doesn't cut it. So be picky about where you're going to look for information, and I think that in our meetings, our Women Heart meetings, we talk about various issues, and I think that's important too, and to learn to advocate for ourselves. I think that's huge. Advocating for yourself is huge.
It is, and there are a lot of reasons why that doesn't happen, but it's great advice. Well, BJ, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight your story and your tips and your advice. And I think people are going to learn a lot from this. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having
me. Sure. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to sign off now. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, BJ, for coming. I'll be talking to you soon. And for everyone here, we'll see you next time on the broadcast. Bye-bye.